And we're off. Thank you. Welcome everyone to League of Women Voters Lincoln-Lancaster's Lunch and Learn program. We gather together the first Thursday of every month, generally from 12 to 1, to learn about important issues facing our community and our state. Today, we are really pleased to welcome a couple folks who will be speaking to us about the Support Our Schools initiative. And we're very pleased that they're making time today. I want to let you know that here's what we're going to be talking about today. So a little bit of introduction. Nebraskans have historically supported the public schools, which are consistently ranked in the top 10 nationally for providing quality education. Recent efforts to divert public funds to pay for private schools threaten our public school system, which serve 9 out of every 10 kids in Nebraska. We'll discuss the passage of and problems with the private school voucher schemes in Nebraska, reference LB 753, and in 2024, LB 1402, and the successful referendum petition drives to protect Nebraskans' right to vote on this critically important issue, which goes to the very heart of funding for our public schools. We are joined today by two leaders in this effort. Let me introduce to you first, Jenni Benson. By the way, it's her birthday today, so you can smile at her virtually and send her good energy. Jenni is a sponsor of Support Our Schools Nebraska, a coalition of organizations that support public education and that has successfully led 2 referendum petition efforts to let voters decide the fate of public school voucher schemes. Jenni earned degrees in elementary education and special education from the University of Nebraska. She has taught at the elementary, middle, and high school levels. She recently concluded 7 years of service as president of the Nebraska State Education Association. Welcome, Jenni. Joining her today is Tim Royers. Tim is the 2016 Nebraska Teacher of the Year, taught social studies and served as debate coach for Millard West High School before being elected president of the Millard Education Association. He was recently elected president of the Nebraska State Education Association and takes office September 1st. So he's just fresh into this new role. Welcome and thank you, Tim. He has earned a bachelor's degree from Northwest Missouri State University and a master's degree from the University of Nebraska at Omaha. He serves as a sponsor of Support Our Schools Nebraska. So they have a presentation prepared. I will ask folks that have questions as we go along to please enter those in the chat. By doing so, our speakers will have a chance to answer your questions when we have a moment to pause, maybe about 12:40 or so. But with that, a big introduction, welcome and thank you for Tim and Jenni, and we're ready for the program.
All right. Tim, can you hear us okay? There he goes.
Yeah.
He went on off mute. Tim is in Columbus at a site visit. So there you go, Tim. Slide's yours.
Perfect. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. Before we get into the details, we want to make sure, well, first, before I even get to what's on this slide, Jenni and I both, on behalf of our organization, just want to extend our sympathies and remember Cynthia Peterson. You know, we were shocked when she passed away last month. She was a great friend and advocate to us. And, you know, we know that she'll be remembered for what she's done, not only here in Lincoln-Lancaster, but across the entire state. So I wanted to make sure to start off by saying that. We also want to start off and just thank the league collectively, not only for hosting this event, but for all the work that league members did on this particular issue. As we'll get into, we had to start gathering signatures this year in a slightly different timetable, and we had to start collecting signatures in May when a lot of our volunteers were teaching. And there were several league members, especially in Lincoln, I'm thinking at farmers markets and libraries, who were critical in our first few weeks of this campaign. We would not have had a successful turn-in without league members and what they did. And so we want to make sure, not only, again, to thank you for the opportunity today, but to acknowledge the work that happened throughout the summer to help us out as well. So if you want to go ahead and hit the next slide, Jenny.
There we go. So as was in our introduction, we support our schools Nebraska. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. We were established last year. I can't believe when I talk about timeframes, it's kind of like a lot going on in a year. Who would thought we would have done a successful petition drive and then had to do it again? So we were glad that we had our 501c3 in place. We were joined by a lot of organizations to talk about public education and the events and the signatures we gathered through that whole last summer. And then again, when we again had this bill introduced in the session last year. As was said also, 9 out of 10 kids go to public schools in Nebraska. 90% of the kids in Nebraska attend public schools. And out of our 93 counties, 48 counties have not any private or parochial school. And they also, even some of those that do have them, for example, if you see Cherry County is the big gray county there, some of those counties only may have a K-2 private school or a very small private school that's counted, but definitely is not serving a lot of the children in the area for sure. All right, Tim.
So it's fitting that I get to talk about this part as the history teacher, but I think one thing that's important that we've talked a lot about is, there's a number of things, not just in education, that Nebraska does that's fairly unique. And it's easy to just take for granted or assume that what we see here in Nebraska is true in other places. But one thing that is pretty unique to Nebraska, back in 1989, the legislature passed a law that allowed for the establishment of what's called the option enrollment program. And so in Nebraska, parents can apply for their student to attend any Nebraska public school. And that is fairly unique. And so, and I can say that firsthand because up until the middle of 5th grade, I lived in Illinois. And when we wanted to change schools, we had to physically move, and that's not the case here. And so there's over 20,000 students in Nebraska that opt to attend in another school district that's not their own. And in fact, that number would be even greater if you count in the fact that in Nebraska, you can do intra-district transfer, So, for example, at the elementary school my daughter goes to, roughly 14% are option in from outside of Millard, but then another 14% are from the Millard area, but that's not their home school. They've chosen to attend that school. And that's been significant because it's also allowed public schools to create really unique, innovative programs and house them in certain schools because they know that parents have the freedom to choose to attend a Montessori program or an international baccalaureate program or a core knowledge academy program. And so again, that's something that's fairly unique to Nebraska that you don't really see in a lot of other states. Now, partially because of that, if you want to go, yep, perfect. That's one of the reasons why, as you heard in the introduction, Nebraska public schools consistently rank very high in the nation on student achievement across multiple different measures. There's different barometers that people use to try and gauge the effectiveness of public schools. But Nebraska has set incredibly high standards, both in terms of what we expect of our students, but also in terms of what we expect for accountability to taxpayers. And so the degree of transparency and openness that school districts have, not just in terms of their budgets, but the ability of parents to review curriculum, all of those pieces. Again, you don't see all of those components in other states like you do here in Nebraska. And the bottom line, and probably the biggest thing, at least that's resonates strongly with me, is we work with all kids. We don't turn away any folks. We accept all students, and our job is to meet them where they are and to bring them the services they need so they can excel no matter how they're doing when they come into our buildings.
All right. Did you cover this one already, Tim? The accountability?
Nope. Yes, I did. The kind of.
Okay.
Oh, not the next slide. Sorry.
Okay.
And on the flip side of that, one of the other reasons that we feel really strongly about this is the opposite is not true in private schools. And there's not the same level of transparency either with budget or with curriculum materials, those things, but also private schools do not have to accept every student. They can pick and choose. I have talked to a number of teachers, including my wife, who's a kindergarten teacher, who every single year they have at least one student join their class mid-year because they had been attending a private school and they were told, you're just not a good fit. You'd be a better fit at the public school. And this was something that came up in debate over 1402. There was a proposed amendment that would say if you accept public dollars, you have to admit all. You can't deny admission, and that amendment was unfortunately rejected. So again, not only do we feel strongly about this because of what we do see in our public schools, but also because what we don't see on that accountability in private schools.
Thank you. I think that as I've taught special education for 37 years, and I have seen myself exactly what Tim was talking about. I had students, one particular fourth grade year, I had students from private and homeschooled situations where they came back for fourth grade because fourth grade was a huge testing year. And if you didn't make those cuts, then you were not doing what you needed to do. And these kids had no special education services up until fourth grade. So you can imagine when 5 of them landed in our fourth grade, we had 4 fourth grade classrooms and we got 5 students that year because the private institutions were not able to meet their needs. It was very difficult, though, when you think about trying to catch them up. And I think that that's one thing that is very disingenuous when we talk about all of this that we've been working on, these voucher schemes. These voucher schemes, Nebraska is 49th in the nation for accepting any kind of tax credit voucher. We don't have charter schools. We don't have subpar schools popping up everywhere. And so when 753 came into play last year during the legislature, we worked very hard trying to get it to not have cloture. And unfortunately, we had some people who had been perceived as friends of public education voting in favor of these voucher bills. And this one was about a tax credit, dollar for dollar tax credit. If you donated, if you were owed $10,000, which most of us on this call would not be in that tax bracket, $10,000, you could take 5,000 of that and use it for this opportunity scholarship. And so that passed. Then this summer, we got to work. We had 90 days to collect 62 or so thousand signatures were needed in 37 counties to be able to move this on to the ballot as a referendum. We collected 118,000 signatures last summer during that 90 days. And then we went to work because we made it on the ballot. However, for some reason, our legislature says things like, well, if you don't like it, take it to the ballot. If you don't like it, get a petition. Well, then when you get a petition and you do very well on that petition, they stop counting at 90,000 signatures. Then the legislature says, oh, just kidding. We really didn't think democracy was what we were talking about. So it only works if they get what they want. But then if somebody comes in and challenges, which, by the way, we have several this year that are doing that, then they took the right to vote right out of, rip the rug right out of our voters' hands, even after we had done that work. So then came in, passed a new bill, LB 1402. LB 1402 repealed 753 and then put in another. And I like the way, Karen Kilgaren, I think she's on today, is our great communications director at NSEA. And we call them schemes because it is a scheme. When you are trying to scheme the voters, when you are elected to represent the voters, and then you scheme them, that is not okay either. So we are looking at our quick, history of vouchers. 1402 uses state general funds, tax dollars, to pay for private schools and for scholarships, publicly funded scholarships for private schools. 1402's private scheme is expensive, and we'll talk about how in other states, and it's funny to me because, when my kids ask me for something, or my grands, what do we tell them? Go find out, go Google it, try to research it, do your work, educate yourself. I say that to my grands all the time, but yet it doesn't seem like anyone else was in our legislature just Googling it, because it's very clear that in other states that have started with $10 million, and I really like the way everyone talks about $10 million like it's $1.98. It is not $1.98. These public funds would be otherwise available to support our public schools. And we as a state have rejected 3 times these amendments that would have allowed public dollars for private schools. Our Constitution is very clear on that subject. $10 million is $10 million. And I will use a bill that we had a couple of years ago as well. We were on a committee for a couple years working on safety infrastructure for schools. And again, another mass shooting at a high school, this time in Georgia. It just continues. And Senator Walz called us together to work on school, like infrastructure safety, to say, how do you have secured locked entrances? Because I've been in all 93 counties, and I had walked into schools with no secured entrances, but they're expensive. So the legislature said, okay, we'll give you $10 million and you can apply for grants through school districts, meaning private. Anybody through NDE, private, public, could apply for these funds. Well, that's $10 million. It went like that. There were over $50 million applied. Using $10 million for something that benefits all students, all families, all communities, is a much better investment than investing in very few and taking away those dollars from public school. Tim?
Yeah, so to build on, Jenni talked about kind of the scheme and how this is set up, because the common narrative for 1402's supporters is that they're trying to expand access, but the reality is this is structured in a lot of ways to actually keep access pretty limited and within the same scope of folks. So in terms of who can receive the vouchers from 1402, it's not just anybody that can apply situation. The way the bill is structured, it has a very strict tiered priority list. So the first priority goes to anybody who had received, we call it a voucher. The bill refers to it as a scholarship, but basically anybody who's gotten a voucher before from what was called the scholarship granting organization, which is the term that was used in 753. So if you had gotten something through that previously, you automatically move to the top of the list. Then the next priority goes to anybody that was a sibling of someone who had received a voucher previously. And then it goes down to if you're moving into kindergarten or ninth grade, because those are two of the common kind of on-ramp points. And then anybody that's entering another grade, but was at a public school for a previous semester, one semester. So again, the first priority is going to folks. The first priority is going to folks who had received a scholarship in the previous year, and then a sibling. You know, that's the top two tiers. Now, another piece that we want to talk about, if you can go on to the next slide, Jenny, is, you know, we've mentioned this already, you know, the lack of accountability, the lack of transparency, the lack of oversight. This was specifically actually baked into the bill. So LB 1402 has what we call a hands-off clause that basically says, yes, these schools, these private schools are receiving public tax dollars. However, that does not mean that the state has any additional, you know, authority or can put any programming requirements on these schools or anything. So they get to receive the public tax dollars, but they're not subject to the same public oversight that our public schools are. And so again, that's not speculation. That's literally baked directly into the bill itself. And then, you know, the biggest thing, and, you know, Jenny mentioned other states, and she's going to talk more about some other states here in just a second, but probably from our standpoint, and certainly from my personal standpoint, the biggest concern is, I mean, we've already established $10 million is not a small amount, but the reality is this truly is just the foot in the door, and that this amount grows. And again, this is not speculation. You know, this is the governor himself said when he was testifying on 753, his goal is that this is just the start. And he specifically mentioned Iowa, and Jenny's going to talk about Iowa in just a second. He mentioned how, you know, Iowa committed nearly $350 million, and he doesn't want Iowa to beat us in that regard, meaning in his world, this should be hundreds of millions of dollars that the state of Nebraska is allocating every single year. And so that's our bigger concern, is that, you know, this is already harming our ability to fund our public schools at $10 million. But the reality is, if the proponents have their way, it will be much larger than just $10 million in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, so we don't want to be like Iowa. We don't want to be like any other state. We have valued our local control, and that was pretty evident during the special session. If people want to talk about their public school, they want to say, this is what is best for us. And if our governors think that we need to be like other states, then he hasn't really looked at the success of Nebraska and how Nebraska has done everything through the years to make sure that we are doing what's best in the communities that we serve here in Nebraska, all children. In Iowa, they did all of the same kind of things, started out very, you know, at the projection costs, and the initial cost, as you can see on the slide, was 107 million, but then they were on the hook for 128 million. This year, they're up to 180 million. And if you follow any of the things that are going on in states around us, North Dakota is the only other state that doesn't have these kind of voucher schemes. And if you look at the 2027, $345 million. Oh, it's nothing. It's $1.98. No, it's not. It becomes more and more arduous and more burdensome. And where are we going to get the money? And as Tim knows, I joke about the fact that, oh, well, we're going to tax honey roasted peanuts to raise it money, not regular peanuts, but honey roasted, because those are a sin. We do not want to say, where are we going to find this money now? On the backs of people who are the most marginalized anyway, who are already struggling to make ends meet. And to say that these scholarships are for those families, those kids. I had a direct conversation with a senator who said, parents will get in their car and drive 2 counties an hour away so that their child can attend a private school. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. How now are you saying that these parents have the means to be able to not be working, obviously, if they're driving their child 2 hours back and forth and not working, when you're saying these are for the kids that need them the most, well, in Iowa, the majority of those who received the voucher already were in private school. And the average income is $128,000 a year for the average. Well, I don't call that average, but that was the average income. So if you look at what they're using for facts, those don't seem like facts that are being truthfully told. And if you look again, if you Google, if you research, if you look at the things that have happened, private schools then increase their tuition from anywhere from 5% to 93% because they wanted more money from the public fund. Arizona is just a mess. It's a mess. We don't want to be Arizona either. Arizona's program started at 4.5 million, and it's estimated that it will be over 900 million for 2024. And the folks I talked to, it is out of hand. The vouchers, there's no accountability for them. They get a voucher, they can use it for whatever they want. We have heard of trips to Disney World as an educational opportunity, using the public funds to fund that. Toys, Lego sets, playground sets for your yard, all on public dollars because they got a voucher that has absolutely no accountability.
And, Florida, we're kind of progressively getting higher and higher in the costs because there's different, like Jenny said, we're state number 49. If there's an upside to that, it's we can point to plenty of other states who have been farther down this journey than we are. And in 2023, Florida's program exceeded $4 billion. And, on this slide, it says Florida is now funding 2 separate systems. That's not hyperbole. In fact, if you look at some of the recent news coming out of Florida, they're looking at shutting down public schools because they're so short on funds. And not just in rural areas. I know consolidation has been historically a topic in Nebraska. They're closing down public schools in high populated areas because they literally do not have the money to fund both systems. And so, these are just 3 examples. If we were going to go state by state, Jenny and I could give you more. We could drop another half dozen examples easy if we wanted to. But these states we feel serve as really strong caution indicators on what happens when you let that foot in the door on a voucher program.
It's interesting, I attended a training with a teacher from Orlando, and you would think Orlando, it's a well-to-do community, and that's not necessarily true. And they were talking about how the public schools, like Tim said, the funding has gone way down, but the amount of children that are coming back from private schools and they have no funding, they have no resources, and they have no teachers, because they hadn't budgeted for them to be in their schools, and yet they're coming back, and then that creates another funding issue as well.
So this obviously brings us to why we're here, which is, the Constitution makes it very clear. Jenny and I will use this phrase a lot. We talk about how the people are the second house because in Nebraska, we have our unicameral, we have our one body legislature. And so our Constitution makes it very clear that the people hold the power to go to the polls on issues. And one of the specific areas that we can go to the polls on is if we feel that the legislature does something that is out of bounds in our mind, then we have the ability to take something that they pass and put it on the ballot, and that's the referendum process. And I saw a question. I saw a question in the chat that's germane to this, which is, the question was, well, do we vote yes or no because it's a repeal? Thankfully, you don't have to worry about whether you need to hit yes or no. When you vote on this, it's either repeal or retain. So the magic word on this subject is repeal. So if that's the word you need to remember, because there, as Jenni said, there's a lot of signatures that were turned in for a number of initiatives. We're the only referendum. We're the only one that's looking to repeal a law that was passed by the legislature. So as long as you remember the word repeal, you're going to be in good shape.
All right. So we are waiting right now. We, as you know, or some of you may know, the Secretary of State told us last week and made a press release that we were at 100%, meaning we had gotten the threshold of signatures in the amount of counties. We turned in 86,000 signatures in 67 days from over 60 counties. We certified over 60 counties. So in 2 years, 2 summers, we, with your help, with our partners' help, with our volunteers, with our educators, with all sorts of folks. I'm meeting with 2 retired railroaders in North Platte tomorrow, and they both have been working, and they want to keep working. So it is across the state, all the counties. We collected these signatures. We had signatures from 93 counties. So for folks to, again, my word of the day, disingenuous, when they say this isn't what the people want, yes, it is. It is what the people want. And the people who are voting for it that don't even have private schools in their entire legislative district, and when they put the numbers out they don't have, that's disingenuous. You're not representing the members. So we are currently waiting to hear from the Secretary of State officially, because it's 110%. We know we were over 100. We are confident that we are at 110 as well. Last year, like I said, they stopped counting at 90,000. They'll stop counting the ballots or the signatures because they've been very busy. And we're not saying that they shouldn't be busy. They should be busy, because if this is how you get your voice heard, then you need to make sure that you are voting. And that's our goal now, is then we're qualified. We are looking to repeal. And like Tim said, we are happy that it is not confusing at all for what we're going to be doing on the ballot on November 5th. All right, Tim.
Yeah, so we here we go. Okay. You know, we've talked a lot about what we advocate for and what we're doing. You know, we want to highlight, well, who's pushing this in the other direction. And I mentioned that, you know, Nebraska is fairly unique. We have elements here that, you know, that we've had for decades that give parents a degree of choice. And the reason that's relevant is because, by and large, the vast majority of the energy and resources that's pouring in to try and set up this voucher is coming from out of state. 4 different out of state billionaires have directly contributed millions of dollars to push for vouchers here in Nebraska. The principal group that's involved is called the American Federation of Children. Since 2021, they've contributed roughly $1.5 million to a couple different groups that operate here within the state. But as you can see on this slide, what the average donation looks like to the Nebraska Federation for Children and then Keep Kids First, which are the 2 groups that are pushing to expand vouchers in Nebraska, the average donation is in the 5 digits. And significant percentage of funds is coming from out-of-state donors to these organizations, and not just those organizations. It's also had an impact on contributions to legislative races for the state senators who are proponents of the vouchers. And so, by and large, it's primarily Betsy DeVos is the main one, who is the former Secretary of Education under the Trump administration. This has largely been her large push in a number of different states. But again, because Nebraska was, you know, one of 2 states, North Dakota is the other holdout, by the way, if you're curious, because Nebraska is one of 2 states that had nothing, that painted a giant target on our back that drew in all of this out-of-state funding. Now, on the flip side, if you want to go and flip to the next slide, you know, on the flip side, one thing that it really kind of has been grinding my gears over the past 2 years. Not that I'm not proud of my work in the association, but it's kind of irked me that it's been billed as this is the NSEA's fight, right? That it's the state teachers union that's been pushing to get this on the ballot. We're certainly a large part of it. We're proud of, you know, obviously Jenni and I are very proud of the work that we've done on this, but we're not alone. There are a number of other organizations who have been fighting this fight with us since day one. We've had groups, whether it's, you know, the Nebraska Farmers Union, whether it's the Omaha NAACP, and all these groups in between, whether they're education groups or just groups that, you know, have concerns about the fiscal impact. There have been plenty of groups, including, we've talked about, you know, where the League of Women Voters has been on this. There have been plenty of groups who have been on the ground doing the hard work since day one. And it's been frustrating to me that the narrative and the headlines have just focused on NSEA, because I feel it really undermines the work and the contributions that a lot of other groups and volunteers have done to get all those signatures that Jenni talked about. But I am proud of the very diverse coalition of organizations that have stood to get this on the ballot, to keep Nebraska as one of those 2 holdouts that does not have a voucher scheme.
Tim, Jenni, if I may just interject for a moment, it's Terry. We have a comment in the chat function, which is where we find questions and comments. Would you care to respond to what's listed there about private schools being characterized as spendthrifts? I'm just reading the last little bit.
Okay, let me read this through real quick. So I'm going to address it as a special education teacher, and we perfectly straightforward. My children attended parochial schools for several years when we lived in Texas and when we moved home when my daughter was in kindergarten. We made that choice, and there was nothing wrong with, and we have not said anything wrong with private schools or parochial schools as far as what they serve and who they serve in Nebraska. We have great parochial schools. We have great private schools that serve those. What we are saying is that public funds do not belong in private institutions without the same accountability for those public dollars. Like the example I gave, lots of private schools applied for the $10 million and were granted that money. That serves all kids. And for that grant money, they have to say exactly what they use the money for. What they're going to do with it. There is not a, here's a check, do with whatever you want, which is what we're saying when we're saying the accountability is not there. As a special education teacher for Lincoln Public Schools for 30 years, I went to parochial schools. I went to Lincoln Christian to serve kids that were identified as needing some extra help. Now, I could only go in there a certain amount of time. When my son needed speech back in the day, you couldn't even go in, the speech therapist couldn't even go into the parochial school. They rented a porch across the street for them to have their therapy. When I was doing it, I went to Lincoln Christian twice a week, and I had kindergarten through 6th graders all in the same room that needed extra services. However, they did not get the same services that they would have gotten if they were going to public school, because the amount of time was not there and the resources were not there for them to do that. And so when Tim talks about accountability, that is a huge piece. And we did try to get accountability into the bill, and it was voted down. So if there are public funds going to a public library, to another organization, there is accountability for what those funds are spent on. And there is no accountability with these dollars as to where they're going, what they're being used for. And then if that child is not doing well in school or is not meeting the things that they need to do, then they will be sent back to public schools. And that is not what we call equal access for all children in Nebraska. Tim, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, the only piece that I would add, Jenny's absolutely right. We tried to push for accountability pieces because truly that's where the issue is that there's not parity in terms of accountability and accessibility for students. And that's our concern, is when you have those public tax dollars going and there's not the same set of rules. And the number of the bill is escaping me, but there was a bill that was introduced in the last legislative session. Senator Linehan, who proposed 1402, actually introduced this bill that basically would have said, here's all of the tests that we want students to take in Nebraska, and all public and private students are going to take the tests, and all public and private schools will report the results. And we actually came in support, because exactly what Jenny said, our bottom line is just we want to make sure that there's similar accountability. But then the bill was amended and they removed that requirement for private schools. So it only would have been a testing requirement for public schools. They did not want to subject private schools to that same requirement. And the reason why we feel so strongly about that concern, about the accountability concern, we talked about other states and the dollar amount, but there's one other thing I want to mention about those other states that's relevant to this conversation, which is, and this is true in study after study, whether it's Indiana, Ohio, Louisiana, Florida, all of the studies are showing the same thing. Students that take vouchers and go attend private schools academically end up worse than if they stayed in the public system. And that's been consistently reported. So that's why we have the accountability concerns, is because we are seeing kids fall further behind academically in those programs in other states. Because like Jenny said, we have no issue with the choice. We have no issue with you choosing to attend private schools. I know plenty of people who have sent their kids to private schools and have had a wonderful experience. But we want to make sure that that's true for everybody if they're receiving public dollars. And the way the rules are set up in the state right now, that accountability isn't there.
Were there other questions that I missed in the chat or comments?
So I will speak to that and just mention, I don't know how many slides you have left, but here's one other comment. I do have some announcements to make, but let's get to this comment. Here, this individual says, there's an objection to using public dollars to fund a religious education focused on a single denomination's belief. The writer says, I do not think it's right to indoctrinate children with public dollars. Probably something that's been out there before. If I may just take a moment, I would like to make a couple of announcements. Tim referenced this earlier, and I just want to make sure that those folks on the call today know that we did lose our good friend and president of our local league, Cynthia Peterson. She passed away unexpectedly on August 20th at just the age of 69. Her passing has left a huge hole in our hearts. We have friends and colleagues who are gathering around. She has been doing incredible work for the league here lately, advocating for a lot of important issues, public schools, women's health care, fair housing, and of course, voting rights. She was inspirational. We're not going to miss a beat because we have strong folks who are serving on the board. I will mention here, for those who'd like to know, her memorial service will take place on Saturday, September 14th at 11 o'clock in the morning at Roper and Sons South Lincoln Chapel, which is on Hohensee Drive. And one other thing before we get to some questions, Jenny, Tim, I hope you're taking a look at that. We are having a general membership meeting that's a very important one on Saturday, September 14th, beginning at 8 o'clock. We are doing some important things at this meeting, not the least of which is voting on our merger with our C3 and C4 arms here, which is going to be pivotal for our good work going forward. Once again, the 14th of September, that's a Saturday from 8 to 11 at St. Mark's Church. at 8550 Pioneers Boulevard. We will have a speaker who will be joining us that day, so it'll be educational as well. Wes Dodge from Better Ballots, Nebraska will be speaking about topics of interest, ranked choice voting, and national popular vote. So he'll be talking about a couple of other issues that will probably be coming to voters here this next year: nonpartisan district boundary drafting and open primaries. There's no shortage of issues for us to be taking a look at. I have posted in the chat at the very top, you'll see our website, lots of information there. So please do take a look. Our next program, before we get to our final questions, will happen on October 3rd. It's always the first Thursday. We will be covering the remaining ballot initiatives that will be on our ballots in November. It'll be presented by our Vice President of Action, Jean McGuire, along with some support from our state league advocates. Thank you all for listening. Wanted to make sure I got that good information out there. You may have some additional slides, Jenny, Tim, to review, but I do see a good number of questions in the chat. And would you rather get to those yourself, or would you like me to pose those questions to you?
You can go ahead and pose them. I'm going to throw up the last slide. It just talks about if anybody wants more information, our website, that kind of thing. Is that okay?
Yes, yes, of course.
Perfect. Thank you.
So let's see. This is the last slide that you have up here.
Yeah.
Okay. So
is it on there? I don't see it.
It's still showing the previous one, not the capital, Jenny.
Okay, just a minute. I can't see what's on there. So just a minute. That is odd. I can't see the screen right now. So we'll put it in the chat. Thank you.
That sounds good. Here's a comment thanking you for your perspective. Anecdotes abound. It sounds as if accountability gets to the heart of the matter. I don't know if you want to say anything else about that.
Tim, do you want to say something?
No, I think they're right. Accountability absolutely gets to the heart of the matter. I think that's spot on.
Okay. State Senator Linehan is term limited. Who do you expect to take up the baton for private school vouchers in the 2025 session?
Well, I think it's not going to be something that goes away. I think we have 12 folks that are going out, and several of them were part of the push. But our governor is very, very, very supportive of the voucher movement and funding, taking public dollars for that. And so Tim is now the president and he will be taking up that fight, but that is something we're going to continue to work on. What we hope is that what happens at the ballot will help direct some of that. However, it hasn't seemed to help with the signatures. So we are prepared. Tim, do you want to say anything about that?
No, I think everything you said I would agree with. This fight did not start with Senator Linehan. There were senators before her that introduced voucher bills. And so I'm sure there will be senators after. But what I will echo is what Jenny said. They went to great pains in this past session to try and stop us from letting the people vote on this issue, because they know the power that a repeal vote sends to the members of the legislature. And so while, yes, we definitely had a hiccup with the signatures, I am hopeful that once we are successful in repealing, it will send a clear signal to the legislature to move on to the issues that the public does.
Very good. I'm seeing several kudos here in the chat. Jenny has also placed a link in the chat, the Support Our Schools Nebraska, public dollars for public schools. Here's a question, wondering if this presentation is available to share with others, and if so, what's the best way to do that?
Karen, are you there? Karen, what do you think? Is she there? We will check with Karen and get back to you about how to get the information out. Thank you, though, for asking for it.
Yes, and
I wanted to talk about the religious part of it for a moment.
Yes.
Because that is, I think maybe Terry put that in the chat. I think that's very important to acknowledge, because if a child is going to a parochial school because they want to, have a change from a public school, and that's the choice, they don't have the choice not to attend religious instruction. They don't have the choice to not be part of what is presented at that school. And I think that's another thing within the dollars and within the public accountability. And also within before I mentioned subpar schools, in other states, what happens is then once you know that this money is out there for private schools, then anyone can start a private school, and they will start them in empty storefronts, malls, wherever. And then one day they are gone. And I was in the Panhandle, and I was meeting with members just last week. And there were 2 teachers they were writing postcards for supporting schools. And they started talking about a religious school that had started in their community, and they both had children in the daycare portion of the religious school that just started. It was non-denominational, but it was by a pastor and his wife. They paid their tuition on Friday it was in the spring of last year, paid their tuition on a Friday. Everyone who had kids paid their tuition for the month for the next, when they were bringing them. They went on Monday and they were gone. The pastor, his wife, his family, everyone gone. And they took all the money that all of those folks had paid for the school. And so it shows it can happen very easily with that private school that they were running in the Panhandle. However, we hear that all over the place about the religious piece of it versus whether or not you just are wanting to go to this school for some other reason. Thank you.
Okay. I see one other question. We might be wrapping up here. Before we do, I want to thank Jenni and Tim for joining us today, for the work that you do, for those of us who are supporting public schools in our state. A question from Linda: does a repeal of LB 1402 also repeal LB 753 from the prior year?
I can take this one.
Go ahead and about the section of 1402.
Yeah. So 1402 did 2 things. One, it created the private voucher program that Jenni and I just spent the hour talking to you about. That was section 1. The remainder of the bill repealed 753. That's how much they did not want us to vote on 753. They actually repealed their own bill. So 753 does not exist anymore. That has already been repealed by the legislature. What we are doing is, that's why our petition was only to repeal section 1 of 1402. We don't want to repeal the repeal. That it's like we're getting real deep in the weeds on procedure there, but we don't want to repeal the repeal. So the petition was to only repeal section 1, which creates the new voucher program. So 753, the legislature already did that work for us. That program is no longer in existence.
Thank you. Good clarification. Here's a question, and let's make this our last. Are we able to get postcards to write in support of this work?
Well, I'm heading to Lexington. These are some postcards. They are just, they have a Nebraska Public Schools, the heart of your community on the front of them, and then a little place to write. We are in the process of getting more made. And so we will be hosting postcard writing parties. We had one in Lincoln, we had one in Omaha, I had one in Chadron. I'm going to Lexington and North Platte tonight and tomorrow. So keep an eye. We will let Terry know when we have more postcards, and you can pick them up at NSEA, or we can let you know where those postcard parties are. We have some in Omaha coming up as well. So we will let you know. And postcards are really an easy way to take some time and just write out, you know, what you like about public schools and send it out. So we have them addressed and stamped already. You don't have to do any of that except write a handwritten message. So thank you for asking that question. Kearney needs some. Okay, well, I will be going to Kearney as well. Let me double check with Eamon, but also we can get him to Kristen Solachek, who works for us, and then we can get that information out to you all. Is that all right, Terry?
Excellent, excellent.
Okay.
Thanks again, League members and guests, for joining us for another outstanding Lunch and Learn session. Just a reminder to please travel on over to lincolnleague.org to catch up on what the League is doing and how you might be involved. Thanks again to our speakers, Jenni and Tim. We appreciate you greatly. And with that, we are adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.